Rumors swirling around Major League Baseball suggest we could see a monumental change hitting the diamond come 2024. The transition will welcome a shift to the automated strike zone, otherwise known as robot umpires. Welcome into this special edition podcast episode. I'm your host, Chase Carucci. I had the chance to sit down with Rick White, the current president of the independent Atlantic Baseball League that has actively tested the highly debated automated strike zone. I also spoke to Chris Cloonan, a freelance journalist who has been umpiring since he was a young teenager. Many baseball fans feel indifferent about the looming league-altering change. However, this show is here to give you a rundown on the potential impact and implications for how baseball may be changed forever. Let's jump straight away to our first interview with Mr. White. I am currently joined by Rick White, the president of the Atlantic League. Mr. White, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Chase. Nice to be with you.
So, Mr. White, I'm just going to jump right into the questions. The Atlantic League obviously has experimented with robot umpires in the automated strike zone, if you will. When was it first exercised in your league, or when was it first used?
We originally started with automated balls and strikes in the second half of the 2019 season. The first half of the season was dedicated to extensive testing, but we did not use the results of automated balls and strikes to determine any of the game action during those tests. It was introduced then formally as a part of our 2019 All-Star game. And then after a little bit more testing, we began the use of automated balls and strikes for true gameplay in late July 2019.
So would you just mind describing for me a little bit on how the automated strike zone actually works?
Sure. It utilizes an advanced performance technology system called TrackMan. TrackMan is a combination system that utilizes both optical lenses and radar technology to track the flight and other characteristics of a thrown baseball. So it was relatively easy to use that technology and then to incorporate two other important aspects of new digital communications technology to create automated balls and strikes. We utilize the strike zone that's commonly displayed in the Major League Baseball rulebook. Second, and more importantly, we had to find a way to communicate the determination of a ball or a strike to the umpire. At one point, we were talking about lights somewhere in the outfield that would be immediately noticeable by a home plate umpire. We then started thinking about utilizing earpieces for an umpire and communicating with buzzers or bells or tones, and then ultimately landed on the idea of a monotonic call where in the umpire's ear, the ump would hear the word ball or the word strike delivered in a very flat tone so that it was literally, if you heard this over and over again, you'd go to sleep. It was so boring.
Right.
That was A. The B part of that premise became pretty interesting because we discovered very early on that umpires were going to have the necessity of being able to override the system. Now, ultimately, we determined that they would not override the system on typical ball strike calls, but on things like hit by pitch, interference either by catcher, umpire, or batter, foul tips, and the like. We needed to be able to have the umpire override what the system was calling, because we learned very early on that as the ball was entering the zone at the front part of the plate, it was prior to certain other things that could happen,
Right.
like a foul tip. So a foul tip doesn't generally take place at the front end of the plate. It generally takes place sometime above the plate or above the heart of the plate. You learn all of this through testing, right?
Right.
And then the C part of the premise is the most difficult part of all. And that was the technology used to communicate the signal into the umpire's ear. We couldn't have it hardwired. Instead, it had to be done through some other means. Then we began looking at a variety of broadband and Wi-Fi solutions. Ultimately, we settled in on a broadcast Wi-Fi that had to cover the area from behind home plate at the backstop all the way through shallow, so beyond the infield.
Wow.
The wisdom here, we think, was displayed early on, which was Major League Baseball making the determination that the umpires appeared to be calling the game, so they wouldn't interrupt the flow of the game, but it also served to reinforce their authority for all things that happened on the field, which was important as we went through the whole mix. But there was a lot of complexity that most people wouldn't understand at first blush.
Right. And you had mentioned early on that the technology is relatively easy to use. Is the technology also expensive, or would you say it's less expensive than people might actually think it is?
I guess expensive is relative. For a minor league baseball team to buy a TrackMan system would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we think of that as expensive. In a world where utility infielders make $7 million a year, perhaps that's a little bit more economical, but it's all relative.
Right.
But Major League Baseball paid for the systems and their installation and then their annual calibration in our ballparks.
And assuming that the cost is feasible for, leagues around the country, is this something that you can see expanding to other leagues around the country, like to colleges, high schools, little league, maybe even?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, but I see it growing based on two things. First will be the ultimate decision by Major League Baseball as to what they want to do with the technology.
Right.
As you know, they've utilized the technology now in single A, double A, and triple A. It's also been a part of the Arizona Fall League. So we know that Major League Baseball may utilize it permanently at any one of those classes of play. What we don't know is their disposition around Major League play. But if it does move to the fields of Major League Baseball or remains at a AAA level, it would suggest that other leagues might try to deploy something similar.
Right.
However, the cost of entry creates a barrier. And whether you're looking at a college conference or a partner league, that creates a real barrier to entry, because not only do you have to install and calibrate these systems, you also have to operate the systems. We're currently working with a group where we believe there will be far more affordable solutions that can be remotely operated. And if in fact that is the case, that would augur well for a league like the Atlantic League adopting this on a permanent basis.
Well, Mr. White, that is everything that I have today. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about this such an important topic that is a part of the future of baseball. So thank you so much for being here.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Chris. Good luck to you, and good luck with your project. Take care.
Following my conversation with Mr. White, I was able to have a chat with Chris Cloonan, someone with former umpire experience, regarding his thoughts on the potential shift. Take a listen. I have the pleasure and honor of being joined here by Chris Cloonan. Chris, thank you so much for being here. How's your day going?
Of course. Thank you very much. Going well. And you?
My day is going great. I'm excited to get this interview underway.
Yeah, let's go.
So, Chris, I know that you are a freelance journalist. I understand that you have a background in umpiring for a little bit. Would you mind just elaborating on what level that you officiated at and what that experience was like?
A little bit. I've been a local little league umpire on and off since I was about 13. I haven't done it since the pandemic, but just in my experience working around town with various little leagues and such, anywhere from 8-year-olds to high schoolers.
Is umpiring something that you would like to get back into in the future?
I've just had enough of the parents,
Yeah.
to be honest. So it's not something I've done since the pandemic. I don't see myself picking it up. It's like something that I've done, like I'm over it. Like I wanted to get the experience, I did it, and I just don't feel like getting yelled at anymore.
Yeah, I feel that. So as someone who is obviously a big fan of the game as you are, and someone who has that background of being an umpire and having that experience, how do you feel about an automated strike zone potentially hitting Major League Baseball as soon as 2024?
I saw a quote. I have to go back and look up where I saw it, that everybody likes the way baseball was when they were 10 years old. And I kind of feel that way. I don't like most, if not all, of the changes that the commissioner has brought to the game, whether it's the 3-batter rule, eliminating the intentional walk, banning the shift, I think is coming next year. I don't like any of that. And the automated strike zone, it seems faulty. It doesn't, from what I've seen, at least in the early stages of it, it doesn't seem like it's all there yet. And I would keep the umpires, doing their strike zones how the game is now. And there's just a human element to the game. I'm not a big fan of replacing the human element with that technology.
Yeah. So, and I want to bring up this was one of my later questions, but I want to bring up a pretty interesting statistic that has been reported by USA Today. The median umpire renders a correct call on 93.5% of pitches. So do you feel that this statistic is lower than you expected? Do you think it's higher than you expected? Or do you think that umpires in general by the fans and by the media are just given a bad rap?
Yeah, I mean, that seems about right. Umpires are human, and we do have a replay system now in baseball. I did see there was a clip where one of the ways they were doing it was they were allowing the umpires to call balls and strikes, but that the batter could challenge the pitch. And so if an umpire makes like an obscenely wrong strike 3 call, ball 4 call, that can be challenged. So I think that actually might be a happy medium. So you're not taking it out of the umpire's hands, but you're making sure that something just totally inappropriate doesn't happen as far as a ball or strike call. Because I mean, we do that with the like plays on the bases or out or safe at first, things like that. Because when you don't have a system like that, different sport, but I'm sure you remember the Saints-Rams game where like the wrong team went to the Super Bowl because the pass interference call was missed. Like we can't have that, right? So I do think that there is a way to implement it where you're not taking the umpires out of the game and you have like somebody in the ear saying ball strike. Like, no, but you can allow them to still do their job while correcting egregious calls. Because look, technology is always advancing. It's always going to creep into the game. We have StatCast now and all these different things that we didn't have before. So it's a way to improve the game that by making more accurate calls without fundamentally changing the game. Like the 3-batter rule fundamentally changes the game because the manager can't go out and bring in a lefty to face Bryce Harper, right? He's got to leave the guy in there for 3 batters. When you fundamentally alter the game, that really leaves a bad taste in my mouth and a lot of fans too. But for, just simply correcting just terrible calls, I think that's something everybody would be on board with.
Can you see this potentially hitting lower levels of competition like high school baseball, travel baseball, little league? And if so, how would you feel about that?
Well, I think the issue there is the advancement of the technology. When technology comes out, looking at anything, computers, televisions, when it's brand new, it usually doesn't work all that well and it's super expensive. So, but over time, the price goes down and the quality goes up. So I think it might be something that you would see years down the line. You want to see how it plays out in the pros and in the minors. And then you have to see like how expensive it is. Does a high school have a budget for that? Does a high school have a budget to put StatCast on their field? Probably not, right? But maybe a major university would. I think it will work down level by level if it does at all, because obviously the financial part of it is important, especially when you're talking about, Little League has gotten so expensive. You're really seeing a shift in the demographics. It's not just, Bob Feller, throwing a ball out by a barn anymore. It's like $500 bats and these tournaments all around the country. Like, it's expensive, but that's probably something that wouldn't occur for quite a while.
Yeah, and even if it did occur, say 10, 15, 20 years down the road, could you see that hurting the game in terms of, the growth of young players, whether or could you see that even helping the game with more accurate calls in the strike zone?
Well, I think we'd have an answer to that, because we would see how it would be playing out at the major league level. We could watch it every day and see how it's affecting the development of the best players in the world, right? So by then, if they choose to implement it at the lower levels, it's because it's working out at the big league level.
Chris, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Best of luck, my friend. Keep reaching out, working hard. It'll come through.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's hard to imagine baseball making this change, especially when they've had the human element with umpires calling games for over 100 years. With new rules approaching in 2023 of bigger bases, less pickoff attempts, and a pitch clock, I think this change, whether it comes in 2024 or beyond, will certainly be implemented. It's unclear how this may impact surrounding leagues, but with leagues like the Atlantic League already testing the automated strike zone, the dominoes will fall and other leagues will follow. Baseball and sports in general are forever changing, but it's up to you to decide whether or not you're in favor of this colossal change. Thanks again to Rick White and Chris Cloonan for participating in this podcast. This has been Chase Carucci, and thank you for listening.